Welcome back to the book of Revelation. Today we're going to talk about the character of Jezebel because she is mentioned in the last paragraph of Revelation chapter 2. And I'm not going to assume that everybody knows who Jezebel was. Historically, people have been very familiar with that name up until recent times, and there's a lot more Bible ignorance going on out there. Just these references are not used commonly, and so many of you might not be familiar with the character of Jezebel. So we are going to go into great detail so that you will be brought up to speed on this character, so you understand when Jesus refers to this woman in the church as Jezebel. If you understand the history of who this was, you'll understand how negative that connotation is. Okay, so today it's gonna be kind of long, but you will have a pretty thorough understanding of the character of Jezebel when...
To the angel of the church in Thyatira write, "These things says the Son of God, who has eyes like a flame of fire, and his feet like fine brass. I know your works, love, service, faith, and your patience. And as for your works, the last are more than the first."
So he starts out on a positive note. This is what I like about you. You know, you guys are doing better now than you did in the beginning. You're growing. And that translates into behaviors and attitudes that are more in line with what pleases God. So this is a good thing. Great compliment to have. So the people in Thyatira are doing something right. But then he dives into what he doesn't like.
"Nevertheless, I have a few things against you, because you allow that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit sexual immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. And I gave her time to repent of her sexual immorality, and she did not repent."
From the way it's worded, it sounds like Jesus is saying that this woman, who he's calling Jezebel, doubtful that that's a real name. We don't name a lot of people Adolf anymore or Benedict because these names are so famous for belonging to somebody who did really bad things. And so you don't really see too many people named Jezebel. Highly doubtful. So Jezebel was like 1,000 years before this book was written, but she was so famous that it is doubtful anybody named their kids Jezebel. Can't rule it out entirely, but it's doubtful. What he has against the church is that they allowed her to continue. Nobody stopped her. And so he's not saying, I'm angry with the whole church because everybody is following her. She does have a following and she is teaching, but what I have against you, the faithful, is that you're allowing it. You're letting it go. He kind of suggests that regarding Jezebel, he's done with her. He gave her time to repent, and she didn't. So he's about to come down on her. But he's upset with the pastor and the leadership, I presume, because they haven't stopped her. There's a word that we need to review here because the word pragmatic is important in that it gives us an understanding of how this woman came to power, and how she influenced people, and how she herself thought. The word pragmatic is defined as follows: relating to matters of fact or practical affairs, often to the exclusion of intellectual or artistic matters. So that might be a little fuzzy, so when you hear it in a sentence, though, it becomes crystal clear. And the sentence that's in the dictionary is, pragmatic men of power have had no time or inclination to deal with religious or social morality. No time to deal with religious or social morality. So, these men of power have more important things on their plate. All right? We have an economic crisis. We have a military crisis, and we're going to have to cross some boundaries if we're going to get the job done. The task at hand is so important that religion and ethics take a back seat. Yeah, we might have to break a few eggs, we might have to cross a few lines and hurt some people's feelings, but we need to get the job done. When there's a chicken in every pot and everybody's pockets are full of money, then we can sit around and muse about religious values and ethics and things like that. We have an emergency on our hands, and we have to act, and if we do something immoral or offensive to God, well, we've got more important things to deal with. That defines what it is to be pragmatic. Another way of saying it is, let's be realistic here. Come on. You're obeying God, and it's you're worried about offending God. He's invisible. He doesn't talk out of the sky. We can't worry about that stuff when we have something important that we have to get done. So, consideration of God's feelings and of morality, that takes a back seat for getting the job done. That's what it is to be pragmatic. Now, this woman, Jezebel, is described as allowing certain behaviors that God detests. Not just allowing them, she's encouraging them. So Jezebel is in this Christian church and has a leadership role, calling herself a prophetess. So she's actually making the claim that God speaks through her. And he's revealed a couple things to her that she is teaching the rest. It's been revealed to her that, all that sexual immorality stuff in the Bible, not a big deal. Okay? Christianity is just too restrictive. I should say Judaism and Christianity are too restrictive. They limit the expression of sex to marriage. You can't have sex with another person unless you're married to them. All right? And it tells you that you can't have sex with any family members, all right? Can't have sex with animals. If you're married to one person, you can't have sex with somebody that's not your spouse. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, my goodness. It's not natural. And I can imagine in her pragmatic reasoning saying something like, if you commit sexual sin, Jesus understands. He'll forgive you. Just like that woman caught in the act of adultery. He didn't throw a rock at her. Okay? He forgave her. So, because Jesus died for your sins, don't worry about it. All right? Now, the other thing, unless you're very familiar with the epistles, you might not be aware of that reference to she's getting people to eat meat sacrificed to idols. What is that about? Thyatira was a pagan city, of course. And prior to these people's conversion to Christianity, they had idols that they worshipped. And one of the ways that you worship an idol is you bring an animal and sacrifice it to your God. Now, what do you do with that meat once you've sacrificed it? Well, if you're faithful, let's say that your particular idol was Dagon. That was your favorite god. So you bring a squirrel and you sacrifice it to Dagon. All right, great. It's dead now. Its blood is offered to Dagon. But what do you do with the meat? Well, the priests figured out a way to make money. They would then take the animal and sell the meat. But many people who are members of the Dagon cult, they're not going to eat this because it was sacrificed to Dagon. That would be sacrilegious to eat the meat that got sacrificed to Dagon. That's Dagon's meat. And so they would shun that. However, what if you're not a follower of Dagon? Okay, you're a follower of Aphrodite. Well, in this particular case, it'd be Astarte. But whatever, let's say you follow a different god. Well, you'll if it got sacrificed to Dagon and you don't care about Dagon, you'll buy that meat at half price. Well, the Christians, they don't follow any of those gods. They don't believe in any of those gods. So one of the freedoms that you have is because you have because you don't believe in these gods, then you can buy it all. That's one of the benefits of being a Christian in a pagan country, is that whereas large percentages of the people don't want to eat this meat because it'd be sacrilegious, Christians can say, hey, you know what? Give me that cheap meat. We'll take it because we don't believe in any of those gods. Now, problem is this, and Paul dealt with this. Now, Paul talks about this in his letters, that some of the Christians were flaunting it. They were like, hey, we don't believe in any of these gods, so free meat. We're going to save all kinds of money. This is one of the benefits of being a Christian. Whereas some of the new believers would come in, and let's say they previously were followers of Yam, okay, that was one of the gods, and they're like, oh my gosh, their whole lives, they looked down on people who ate meat that had been sacrificed to Yam. That was sacrilegious. And so the idea of buying meat that had been sacrificed to idols, still in their minds, they think of this as a bad thing. And so when they see their Bible study leader going out and eating meat that was sacrificed to Yam, And they're like, oh, that's immoral. Well, it's not in the Bible, but it bothers their conscience. And so that could cause them to lose respect for the Bible study leader and maybe think maybe Christianity is immoral. You are doing something immoral. And so Paul dealt with this. He says, look, if it doesn't bother you and you know that the idols aren't real and you want to buy meat sacrificed to idols, that's fine. It's not against the Bible. God never said you couldn't do that. So you have that freedom. But if it causes a brother or sister to stumble, then it's wrong. Okay, it's wrong. So Christianity is very conscientious. Conscientious means you restrict your behavior because you don't want to unnecessarily offend other people. That's part of love. We're supposed to be like that. And some people who have like antisocial personality or any of the cluster B personality traits, they're not very conscientious. They're so focused on self, they don't think about the feelings of other people, the needs of other people. Okay? And so they just go ahead and do things without thinking and restricting their behavior for other people. And that's something that as Christians we should do. And here we have Jezebel, who sounds like she's telling them, you know what, don't worry about anybody or anything. You can eat all the meat sacrificed to idols, and if they can't handle it, tough nuts for them, okay? You can do that. And so in these ways, she is enticing people to fall. She is given the green light on whatever sexual immorality and tell them to go ahead, don't worry about offending people, do what you want. And these are things that are kind of upsetting to Jesus. She's pragmatic, and in her pragmatism, she is turning people away from God. In order to understand Jezebel, you have to understand her religion, because actually, it's her religion that God hated. He couldn't stand the Baal pantheon. He was absolutely disgusted by it. It infuriated him. Over and over in the Old Testament, when he tells the Israelites to go into Canaan and wipe out those indigenous populations and tear down their altars, his rage is directed at their religion. They had come up with the most corrupt, hideous, offensive religion ever as far as God is concerned. And he came down on them. Those Canaanites really bothered him because the religion that they made up was highly offensive to him, and we're going to see why. Now you might be asking yourself the question, you're not a historian, you're a doctor. What do you know about Middle Eastern ancient religions? Well, as some of you may know, I am an author. I've written 2 books, and my first book was called The Last Nephilim. The second one was Keftorim. And for the second book, I had to do extensive research on the Baal religion, on the Canaanite pantheon. And I used several sources. My primary source was a couple of books by a man by the name of Stephen Andrew Missick. He's a very good historian, did a lot of work, and he wrote a couple of books. One published in 2012 called The Epic of Baal, The God of Thunder. The second called The Baal Cycle, The Art of the Epic of Baal. Okay? And he used several sources. The 3 primary sources that he used to gather his story was the Bible, the Ugaritic text, and an ancient source called the Sanchoniaron. He does a wonderful job of assembling a logical narrative that flows and is easy to understand. I highly recommend the books if you're interested in knowing more about the Canaanite pantheon. Now, it's not like there was one book, like a Bible for the people of Canaan. We have stories, we have myths, we have legends, and while all of the people of this region believed in that pantheon, what exactly they believed about those gods varied slightly from tribe to tribe. All right, the Canaanite people had very much in common with the Israelites. They were genetically related. They were cousins to the Israelites. They spoke the same language, kind of like the difference between Americans and British people. They spoke the same language but with a different accent. First thing we need to bring up here is that the Creator God, the number one first God in both religions, in both Hebrew and the Canaanite religion, name was El. God's name was El, okay? The difference, however, is that with the Canaanite religion, El had a wife. And you may be wondering, well, who was God's wife? There is no entity in the Genesis story that could possibly serve as God's wife. Well, there is. The tree of knowledge. Okay, the tree of knowledge in the book of Genesis is Asherah, the wife of God, because in the Canaanite religion, the tree of knowledge has the ability to shapeshift. And one of the favorite shapes that the tree of knowledge forms is the shape of a female deity, a female god, and that becomes the wife of El. Now, where they are very dissimilar is that the God of the Bible creates with his mind, with his will, by speaking things into existence, okay? In the Canaanite religion, he creates with his privates, just like a human does. So El and Asherah get together and make a bunch of baby gods. They had specifically 70 offspring. Most of them were male. Now, if you read the book, these names will make a lot more sense to you, but they included Yam and Mot and Yerek and Tanith and Dagon and all the rest, a total of about 70 children. Now, they had mostly male gods. However, there was at least one female, and her name was Tanith. So Tanith was the daughter of El and Asherah. So according to Canaanite mythology, Tanith and Dagon hooked up and became a couple. Now, as you may know, in the Canaanite religion, the chief deity for most of these groups was Baal, all right? Why isn't it El? Well, if you read the narrative, you understand that El was unrespectable. He was, in every respect, a dirty old man. And when you read the accounts, it's kind of X-rated, okay? But Elohim, or El in the Canaanite religion, was disgusting and virtually unrespectable, which may be one of the reasons why God really hated their religion. Now, you might be wondering, who is Dagon? You probably heard that name. Dagon was the chief deity of the Philistines, so that's probably, if you're familiar with the Bible, probably what you're thinking about there, okay? Dagon was also the fish god in the Egyptian religion. Now, before long, we have El asking his wife Asherah if it's okay if he has relations with his daughter Tanith. And there were no taboos against incest in the Canaanite religion. And I believe, if I remember correctly, Asherah wasn't too happy about El's proposal. Hey, do you mind if I sleep with our daughter? Asherah wasn't digging that, but it didn't matter. He was the creator god. He didn't care, and so he slept with her anyway. But after she hooks up with her father, they have triplets. Baal and two sisters, Anath, who was the goddess of war, and Ashtoreth, the goddess of sex. And this unholy trinity became extremely popular. Variants of these three gods went throughout the entire civilized world and influence. People think, oh, look at the past, they had thousands and thousands of gods. If you take a look at it and you really examine it, there weren't thousands and thousands of gods. There were thousands of variations of names for these three gods. So just different cultures, different geographic locations, but it's the same three gods repeated over and over again under different names. So in this slide, we see the first, second, and third generations of gods. So let's talk about these three, starting with Baal. So Baal was the son of El and his daughter Tanith, so Dad was his grandpa too. He is considered the father of Moloch, and he is identified as the god of thunder and rain and basically nature, as well as the god of fertility. His full name is Baal-Hadad, which means king of the gods, owner of the gods, or boss of the gods. Next up, we have his sister Ashtoreth, and as I mentioned, she is the goddess of sex. And if you read the books, you'll see why I think it's X-rated. She plays a big role in that rating. She was pretty disgusting. She was very non-discriminating. She would have sex with everybody and everything, and I don't mean that as an exaggeration. Literally, everybody, everything. Doesn't matter gender, species, living or not. I mean, she was quite a character. And next there is Anath, the goddess of war, who was incredibly bloodthirsty. I mean, she was before Mars, she was before Ares, She was the original god of war. Okay, let's go back to Ashtoreth. There's something very important to keep in mind. Prior to Ashtoreth, there may not have been something called temple prostitution. She essentially invented it. What that means basically is that in exchange for your money, you get an opportunity to have sex with the god of sex by proxy. So while you're having sex with temple prostitutes, you are, from a religious perspective, you are having sex with the goddess of sex, and that's one of the ways you pay homage to her. Worship of this deity spread all over the world. It was very popular. I suspect that men really liked this part of the religion. Most of the Canaanite tribes believed that Moloch was the son of Baal. There are some that equate Moloch to Baal. So Moloch and Baal are interchangeable. They are considered the same deity for some of the Canaanite tribes. Now, Moloch is particularly nefarious and was very much despised by God, or rather, worship of Moloch was very much despised by God because there was a Moloch rite. And what that involved was taking your child and throwing them alive into a fire, burning them to death on an altar. Okay? This started, we have a story or a legend of a particular king who was king of Jerusalem before the Israelites came into town. Okay, according to the legend, there was an incredible drought. The rain stopped coming for a very long time. Crops were dying. People were hungry. Okay, it was a serious situation. And Baal was dead because his uncle killed him. All right? So people would pray and pray and nothing would happen because the God of nature is dead. No more rain. And so it was a crisis. And his son was there, but his son was a do-nothing kid, and prayers didn't seem to have an effect. Until the king of Jerusalem sacrificed his son to Baal's son Moloch. Says, okay, Moloch, you're not receiving our animals, you're not responding to prayers. What if I kill my kid? And so he threw his kid into a fire, burned him alive. And then it rained that very day. And from this legend, we have the rite of Moloch, to where if you have something you really want, somebody's got a disease that needs to be cured, or you need food or money or whatever, if you're in dire straits, how you handle this is you throw your child into a burning fire, and that will appease Moloch, and you'll get what you want. That practice was throughout all of Canaan. It became a very popular practice. So, in my opinion, it became a source of birth control. God was very unhappy with the people of Canaan for this particular nefarious practice. In Leviticus 20, we have reference to many of the behaviors of the Canaanites that God detested. And the Hebrew word that he used to describe his disgust was toeva, which means absolutely, I hate this, I find it disgusting and offensive to me, and I expect capital punishment for violation of these guys. Leviticus 20, starting in verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Give the people of Israel these instructions, which apply both to native Israelites and to the foreigners living in Israel. If any of them offer their children as a sacrifice to Moloch, they must be put to death. The people of the community must stone them to death." All right, so capital offense. God absolutely despised it when people threw their kids in the fire. When it's first mentioned in the Bible, this sacrificing your kid to Moloch like that in the fire, God describes not only his disgust, but almost a kind of surprise. And he says, you know, I never commanded anybody to sacrifice their kid. I didn't even think of that. All right, and this is rare for God to say something like that. It says, man, that didn't even cross my mind. This is nuts. This is totally disgusting, and it's nuts. Okay, so that is God's response to this ritual of killing an innocent child because you want something from God. Now, as we go into some video clips describing the history and life of Jezebel, you need to understand there's a lot of reference to the Phoenicians. Phoenicians came from, the country of Phoenicia is modern-day Lebanon, okay? So these are the ancient Lebanese, and they are referred to in the Bible just as Canaanites. And as you can see from this map here, you have Israel that's divided into two kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And just north of Israel, we have this country of Phoenicia.
3,000 years ago, the Mediterranean Sea washed up against the shores of ancient Palestine. Israel thrived under the reign of King Solomon. Even so, other countries, some of which waited for any opportunity to invade, surrounded the tiny nation. According to the Bible, one of the first seeds of Israel's destruction came in the form of a Phoenician princess named Jezebel. But long before her birth, Israel and Phoenicia began moving toward a collision. After King Solomon's death in 922 BCE, the country was torn apart by social and economic strife. Ultimately, it split into two kingdoms, Judah to the south and Israel to the north. Externally, neighbors bent on Israel's destruction constantly threatened war.
But at the same time, Israel was still a tiny sliver of land among very great and vast cultures who had deep and sometimes quite widespread religious beliefs, and Israel had a difficult time withstanding the influence of surrounding cultures.
All right, Israel had a difficult time withstanding the influence of the surrounding cultures, and I alluded to this earlier. All right, you got all of these cousins who speak the same language, who have the same creator God deity, except that he has all these children, including the unholy triplets, Baal, Anath, and Ashtoreth. All right, and so they're trading with them, they're living next door to them, and these guys, they outnumber the Israelites, and there is talk going back and forth, and they're having an influence on the people, because, you know, they didn't, it's not like today where everybody can have a copy of the Bible sitting in their house, where they can review it and remind them of what God said, and so forth. You didn't have that, okay? You had prophets who would remind you of this kind of stuff, and they didn't live next door to you, and so staying true to what God said was a little bit harder when you're in a time when there is no Bible you can pass around and reinforce your beliefs. And you have all of these people on the outside of the country who believe in this Canaanite pantheon. And so you're the odd man. It's kind of like today, as a Christian, our culture has changed so much and is so different. There was a time when Christian values and our American cultural values were very, very close. And you could go to a public school and learn about God and the same values, the same rights and wrongs from the Bible were the same rights and wrongs that were in our culture. In the last 40 or so years, we have gone so far away. The values of our culture are now pretty much what the pagans believed, all right? And we are the odd man out, and there is pressure to conform because the difference is so huge. And the people that are related to us, that speak our same language, the people we agree with on so many issues and so many things, we disagree on values. We disagree on morality, though. And so there is pressure from the huge volume of people who believe different. There is pressure on us to conform and change our beliefs. That's what the Israelites faced, being surrounded by all of these Canaanite people who believed in the same pantheon. As I mentioned, they all believed in creation, they all believed in the Garden of Eden, they all believed in the flood story, and the chief deity, or the creator deity for both religions, is named El. The Canaanite people, they looked a lot like Israelites. Just by looking at somebody, you couldn't tell whether they were Jewish or Canaanite. Not until the men took their pants down and he said, "Oh, circumcised, okay, you must be a Jew." Charles Haddon Spurgeon said something that I've mentioned before, but it's worth memorizing. Discernment is not a matter of simply telling the difference between right and wrong. Rather, it is telling the difference between right and almost right. Now, going back to Leviticus 20, let's read on a little bit. It says, God speaking here, "I will also turn against those who commit spiritual prostitution by putting their trust in mediums or in those who consult the spirits of the dead." These occult practices were rampant in the Canaanite system, okay? All of those tribes were very heavily into witchcraft, spiritism, occult practice, mediums, horoscopes, all that stuff. The Canaanites and the Egyptians, they were all into that. That was That's the oldest religion, man, okay? And so this is part of their religion. And God didn't like it. He called it spiritual prostitution. And then he goes on to list all of the abominations, things that he absolutely detests. He calls them all toeva, and each of these gets a capital punishment. That's the saying, Israel, you're under, if you in this covenant we have, you follow my decrees, and I will protect you and guide you as your God. Kind of like a marriage contract, okay? And so in the rest of Leviticus chapter 20 here, he goes through and lists all of the things that he considers abomination. And I'm not going to read through all of this because there's a lot of material. It says, don't dishonor your parents, don't commit adultery, don't commit incest. And if you're wondering what incest is, it goes through and lists specifically which relatives you're not supposed to be having sex with. Don't engage in homosexual acts, don't commit bestiality, do not engage in any occult practice, including witchcraft, consulting mediums, consulting spirits of the dead, horoscopes, fortune tellers of any kind. None of that. All toeva. Now, I want to go back to this word spiritual prostitution because it's relevant when you're talking about his discussion of Jezebel. Spiritual prostitution, he says, I will turn against those who commit spiritual prostitution by putting their trust in mediums or in those who consult the spirits of the dead. Why does he equate consulting a spiritist? Why does he equate that with prostitution? To answer that, you need to think about the difference between the services of a wife and those of a prostitute. All right? So the prostitute here, again, being the medium or spiritist or whatever, the mantra of an occult practitioner is, I will guide you into the future for money. I will gladly tell you what you want to hear for cash. I don't pretend to love you. I perform for money. So you go to a fortune teller, you lay down your cash, you read your palm. There you go. You are given direction based on her ability to consult the spirits and tell you what to do. Now, God, being the legitimate wife, the legitimate spouse, his mantra would be, I will guide you into the future because you are mine and I love you. Remain a faithful spouse to me and I will give you my help and direction freely because I am yours and you are mine. All right, that is the difference between the prostitute and the wife. Hence, God describes consulting mediums, consulting witches and so forth as spiritual adultery or spiritual prostitution. The primary goal of God in the life of a believer, who is, God is a loving provider of wisdom and direction, is when we're visiting a medium, then the primary role of God is being redirected to a servant of darkness for money and is absent of love. Ostensibly, when we go to a medium, we're getting the services of the enemies of God, namely demonic spirits. Okay, there is a significant amount of evidence to suggest that the reason that God said don't go to fortune tellers and stuff like that is that, when they're right, when they're not con artists, and when they're able to accurately predict this stuff, it's because they are consulting with demonic entities. And you have now reached out and developed a relationship with someone that has completely rejected God and is in fact an enemy of God, who absolutely does not love you, whose goal is to get you to pull away from God, and then they get to be happy. So this again is called spiritual adultery or spiritual prostitution.
The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said,
I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land that I swore to give to your ancestors. I said I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? And I have also said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares to you.
So this covenant between God and Israel is like a marriage covenant. And it says, stay true to my commands, and I will guide you, I will protect you, I will provide for you, I will ensure that you have enough to find fulfillment in relationships and material goods and security, but you need to follow me. That's the deal. And then we have this relationship like husband and wife. This relationship flourished under David and Solomon. Okay, God gave Israel his protection and prosperity, and the country of Israel became more powerful than they have ever been and ever became, okay, under the influence of these leaders, because they took that relationship seriously and tried to follow God to some degree. Even though they didn't do it perfectly, God blessed them immensely. But the generations that came after Solomon, not so much.
One of those cultures was Phoenicia, just north of Israel, stretching along the Mediterranean. Today, it's known as Lebanon. Beautiful flowering plants and fruit trees grew across the moist land. Its many port cities thrived with commerce. Phoenician merchants found profitable markets for their wares and imported luxury goods from Greece, Cyprus, and beyond. It was the most prosperous country in all of the ancient Middle East. Culturally, Phoenicia and Israel differed dramatically. Phoenicians honored many gods. Israel mandated the worship of one, named Yahweh. Phoenician kings ruled as true monarchs. Israel's king governed according to a strict legal code. Israelites led a sheltered life, while Phoenicians enjoyed a cosmopolitan existence.
They were a coastal people, so that they had sea routes and they could trade with many other places that Israel did not have access to. They were also a highly developed civilization in terms of the artisans, beautiful jewelry, beautiful pots from the region, lots of lovely clothing that was made from lots of beautiful textiles that were there. They were a highly advanced civilization.
The differences between the two nations garnered both envy and concern from the Israelites. Many coveted the diversity of goods and lifestyles that Phoenicians enjoyed. Conservatives rejected what they viewed as pagan religious practices. They fought to keep them out of Israel. For centuries, the Hebrews struggled with this love-hate relationship with the Phoenicians. That struggle was about to take on a new intensity.
So the Phoenicians had a lot of cultural diversity because, you know, they were they were a maritime country, and lots of ships, lots of ports, and that's where their wealth came from, because they could trade their goods with people all over the world because they had access to the sea to such an extent. With regard to diversity, there was a tremendous amount of moral diversity in Phoenicia compared to Israel. Israel just raised children the old-fashioned way, but in the Phoenician culture, you could kill them for stuff. Israel didn't have temple prostitution. Phoenicia did. Occult practices were forbidden in Israel. That was part of the Phoenician religion. There were virtually no sexual taboos in the Canaanite religion, including in Phoenicia. And as we just read in Leviticus, Israel had loads of inhibitions when it came to sexuality. Now, I think that the History Channel made some assumptions. They assumed that Israel was jealous of Phoenicia because of all of their freedom. They make it sound like Israel was suffering under this religious yoke of the Torah, all these laws that are so unnatural. And in Phoenicia, there's so much freedom, and so the Israelites were just so jealous. I don't know what reference they're using. Where did they get that? I have no idea where they get that. I think some of this stuff, they just make it up. How would you know that? I would like to see the document that describes how Israel was jealous of Phoenicia because they were suffering under the burden of all these Mosaic laws.
At the beginning of the 9th century BCE, a princess named Jezebel was born to Ethbal, king and head priest of Phoenicia. She grew up in Tyre, one of the nation's coastal towns. There is no mention of Jezebel's childhood in the Bible. but historical and archaeological studies indicate the lifestyle she enjoyed.
One would expect that Jezebel was probably spoiled rotten, and if she came from royalty at Tyre, she certainly lived in a fine home. The Phoenicians were known for their beautiful clothing, for their artwork, for ivory inlays in walls and in furniture. It was a good life.
A significant facet of Phoenician life involved worshiping their gods. They paid homage to more than a dozen different gods who represented all aspects of nature and health. Their chief deity was Baal, a storm god who controlled nature and fertility. The Phoenician survival depended on the productivity of their crops. Consequently, they took their gods very seriously.
As a young girl, Jezebel, as the daughter of the king, may have been a high priestess for Baal herself, and she would have been raised to respect the gods and goddesses of her country.
Jezebel had many duties as a Phoenician princess, including being properly educated. Because of Phoenicia's extensive political and trade relations, she had to master several skills.
It would be very important for government officials and for royalty to speak probably several languages, to be aware of the customs of other peoples beside themselves, certainly how to win friends and influence people on a diplomatic level. So Jezebel, if she had the training that one would have expected, I would think, of royalty, would have been very well educated and probably very arrogant.
While Jezebel grew to adulthood in Phoenicia, Israel crowned a new king named Omri. A former army commander, his primary concern was for his nation's safety. One of his greatest accomplishments came in abandoning the difficult-to-defend lowland capital of Tirzah in favor of a hilltop location. Omri named his new city Samaria. He imported Phoenician masons to construct an elaborate palace, the likes of which had never before been seen.
The architecture of those buildings, which archaeologists have uncovered, is clearly a notch above the architecture in other Iron Age cities in that part of the world at that time. So it's a leading city.
As the construction of Samaria continued, Omri pursued his other primary goal, maintaining the peace. To that end, he waged successful military campaigns against Israel's enemies and established alliances with many of his neighbors. The most significant alliance he formed was with Phoenicia.
Phoenicia needed inland trade routes, and Israel needed access to the seacoast, so that with increased trade, the economies of both countries would benefit. Both countries would also benefit militarily. They would have a powerful ally, each of them, to protect them from enemies to the north, to the south, and to the east.
Omri strengthened the alliance with Phoenicia by arranging a marriage between his son Ahab and the princess Jezebel.
The logistics of arranged marriages with ruling figures with daughters of neighboring countries and so on was a very common practice. I mean, we know that between the Egyptians and the Hittites. I mean, they were doing it. It was one way to keep them going to war, and I think that was the major motivation of it.
Suddenly, after a life of luxury in a dynamic nation, Jezebel found herself whisked off to a comparatively limited society.
Maybe she viewed herself as an ambassador, a person who could unite the region, who could bring cultural pluralism, religious tolerance, economic prosperity, and military prosperity to this region. Maybe, on the other hand, she didn't want to come to Israel. We have no idea what was in Jezebel's mind.
Describing Jezebel as somebody who's simply a sincere missionary. She's just on a mission because she loves Baal so much. She's going to bring pluralism and tolerance to backwoods conservative Israel. Tolerance? This is the woman that killed every prophet of God, every prophet of the Lord she could find, she had them executed. Does that sound like religious tolerance to you? Now, the other thing is, God, one of the things that God said very specifically was, do not make treaties with these Canaanites, with any of them. Do not. I am the one that's going to protect you. I am going to be the one you need to lean on, not other countries. Do not. I am against these people. Their religion is disgusting to me, so don't make a treaty. And Omri did the very thing that God said don't do. Remember that word pragmatism? That describes Omri perfectly. He gave his son to the daughter of the king of Phoenicia, who was probably also a high priestess for Baal, okay? Why? Because he loved the Phoenician religion? Probably not. He did it because it was the pragmatic thing to do. You know, God said don't make treaties with these other countries. I'm going to make treaties with a lot of these countries because that is how you get peace and prosperity. And that was Omri's attitude.
The Bible does, however, express an opinion about the marriage. It condemns Omri and his son for all eternity, for they invited a strange and powerful woman into their midst.
Omri wrought evil in the eyes of the Lord, and did worse than all that were before him. And Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord above all that were before him. He took to wife Jezebel. First Book of Kings, chapter 16.
When King Omri arranged for his son Ahab to marry the princess Jezebel, he consummated the long and complicated relationship between Israel and Phoenicia. Now the two countries would also share economic and military power. Jezebel's arrival celebrated a marriage of families and of nations.
I think we can guess that when Jezebel first entered the royal house of Samaria, there was great rejoicing that what a good country we are. You know, we're a very important country. We're respected by foreign powers. We have a very prestigious alliance here.
Omri did not live to see his son marry, nor to finish building the new Israelite capital of Samaria. With his death in 869, Ahab became king, and when he married Jezebel, she became Israel's queen. Jezebel brought intelligence, resourcefulness, and determination to the throne. As queen, she commanded the power to carry out her agenda.
What's her name? Diane Sawyer here. That's the narrator. I recognize that voice anywhere. Okay, Diane Sawyer here is saying something that isn't in the Bible. She's making it sound like that Jezebel was a champion for women's rights. Okay? And she's a powerful woman, and the Bible hates powerful women. Where do you get that? Okay? We have several heroes that are female that are mentioned in the Bible. It is not an anti-female book, okay? And so they're making it sound like, oh, the Bible was against her because she was a powerful female. They are setting up a straw tiger, and what that does for the listener, for the person watching this show, is you're supposed to think, oh, that backwater, horrible. People that believe in the Bible are so stupid. They're so backwater. They're offended by a powerful woman. Those sexist morons. That's what Bible belief is all about. It's sexist and stupid. So I just wanted to bring that up because, you know, she just slipped that in there. There are no references because nowhere does it say that she was bad because she was a powerful woman.
In the first mention of Jezebel's name, as soon as we are told that she is married to Ahab, the very next thing we are told is that he builds temples to her foreign deities in the heart of Israel, in Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom. So it's like as soon as she arrives on the scene, she starts influencing her husband in a very negative way.
There were religious/cultic events that she no doubt sponsored. There were, for example, in Phoenicia, all sorts of sacred prostitution rites that she presumably brought to Israel, of which the people had heard and in past ages had probably seen, but which was considered by any of the pure Israelite worshippers to be an abomination.
Though Baal horrified devout Israelites, the deity also attracted many new followers. Within a few years, thousands of Israelites embraced paganism. This made Jezebel a greater threat to her enemies. Others, however, view the queen's actions as honorable.
The first question I have for you is, think about this. What was Omri's motivation for this arranged marriage between Jezebel and his son? Prosperity, okay? Bottom line is that Phoenicia had all of this coastline and all of these ships, way more ships than Israel had. And they had established trade routes all over the world. They were bringing in exotic and expensive goods all over the place. And what they need are more trading partners, more people to buy that fancy stuff. So in this relationship with Israel, what Israel has is lots of roads and a very powerful military and roads that lead to all these other countries, to the east and west and south, and well, maybe not to the west so much because there's water there, but all over there. And so, wow, if their combined nations would be more wealthy, more trading partners both ways, and that means more money. And the other thing is military. At one time, Israel was the military powerhouse of the region under David and Solomon. They were number one in the Middle East. And then Israel split in two, and they no longer became the most powerful nation. And so Omri's thinking, hey, you know, when I was hooked up with the southern kingdom, with Judah, we were powerful, but we don't have that now. Now I'm going to make an alliance, because before it was Israel and the country below me, which was Judah, and that made up the original Israel. But now it's going to be Israel and Phoenicia. And together, we will once again become the most powerful military force in the Middle East. Plus, we're going to make a lot of money. So this is Omri being pragmatic. And what did he give up? What did he give up for all of this potential security and money? He gave up God. You know, and this is what pragmatism is all about. You know, when we have all the security and all the money we need, then we can think about following God's rules. God's pie in the sky. He doesn't do things. He doesn't talk. There are no, so you offend God, woo, what's he going to do? He's invisible. And that is Omri's attitude. Through the prophets, God made it very clear that there are things that you absolutely should not do. And he's going right out and violating the most important commands. Don't make treaties with the Canaanite nations. Instead, break down their altars. Instead, he's doing the opposite. And he's building altars. Well, he didn't do it, but his son did. He married into the Phoenician royal family. Because of Omri, the royal family of Israel is now intermarried with the royal family of Phoenicia, a Canaanite nation.
My guess is that Jezebel came to Israel as a sort of proselyte, as a preacher of her culture, of her religion, and that she knew very well in this more or less backwater kingdom how to promote her goals, and was more than a match, I think, for the palace in which she found herself.
Ahab finished the work his father began, building a two-story royal palace. Its opulence inspired the name Ahab's Ivory House, because of the extensive use of ivory throughout the estate. Ahab also built another palace at Jezreel, north of Samaria, in the Jezreel Valley. The weather there was milder and warmer during the winter than it was in the hills of Samaria.
Now, one of the things that we gather from that video is the heart and goals of Ahab and Jezebel. We don't know very much about Ahab. All right, whatever I say about him is kind of conjecture. We know that he allowed his wife to do whatever she wanted. You want to turn Israel into a Canaanite nation from a religious perspective and to abolish our belief in the Mosaic God? Fine, go ahead, I don't care. What's important to him? Well, he liked palaces. He really liked palaces, and he actually brought over a bunch of engineers and builders from Phoenicia to build his ivory palace. That's why you don't have elephants in Israel today, okay? Or Phoenicia, because the Phoenicians, as you said here, as we just heard, were very good at working with ivory. And so this palace had so much ivory in it, they probably killed about 100 elephants to make that palace. But not only did he have one palace, because Omri built that palace on a hill, because on a hill you can easily defend it from a military perspective. Remember, his father Omri was a general. He was a military man. And so his motivation for building the palace in the Samaria, that's the city that he founded was Samaria, was it was high up and therefore more defendable. But a downside of being high up in the mountains is it's cold. And in wintertime, it's going to be especially cold up there. And Ahab did not like cold weather. So he had a second palace built in the city of Jezreel, which was in the south, where the winters were a lot more mild. 2 palaces! Most kings are happy with one palace, and if you feel the urge for more space, you just add on a room. But no, he has to have a palace in Michigan and another palace in Florida. So not another house, another palace. So Ahab was about self-aggrandizement. He wanted people to know he was bad, he was cool, he was rich, and he used that tax money to build him 2 palaces. Okay? Meanwhile, his wife is bent on importing her religion to Israel. The customs that she imported included child sacrifice, occult practices such as necromancy and witchcraft, idolatry, temple prostitution, unrestrained sexual freedom, and ultimately spiritual prostitution because of fortune-telling and necromancy and so forth. So she was driven. She had specific goals for what she wanted to do with the country. We don't have any indication that Ahab had specific goals for the country. He was pretty focused on doing what he wanted. We're going to get to a story in a minute about a field that he wanted. Next to his palace, he had lots of flowers and everything, but he wanted vegetables and a vineyard, and he wanted to buy the land of the guy that lived next door, and the guy wouldn't sell it to him. And so he became depressed about that. He would stopped eating, and he physically became depressed because he couldn't have what he wanted. That's a window into Ahab's character. He was immature and selfish and certainly not focused on the affairs of state. It was about, he was a baby. He was a man baby that inherited a kingdom and didn't know very much of anything about governing. But sounds like he left it to his wife.
Professor Sharon directs the dig here at Dor. He's uncovered pottery from Greece, Italy, and even North Africa, proving why Jezebel's people are so famous for their trading and seafaring. Jezebel is famous for her sultry ways. Jezebel wasn't just a religious threat. Her people, the Phoenicians, were a commercial threat because they were the most advanced sailors of the time. 3,000 years ago, they sailed from the coast of Israel to Spain, connecting east to west. The amazing thing is that they did it during the Dark Ages. No, much darker than that. A Dark Ages of biblical proportions. It happened around 3,200 years ago.
Around 1200, there's this huge worldwide, or at least Mediterranean-wide catastrophe.
We don't know what really happened, do we?
We don't know what really happened.
No one knows what caused the biblical Dark Ages. Theories range from plagues to barbarian invasion. Whatever it was serious enough to knock the reigning empires out of the picture.
All the big empires basically collapse, and new players enter the scene.
2 of the new nations on the block were the Israelites and the Phoenicians. From the start, they competed for land and power. They left us something interesting. The Phoenicians settled across the Mediterranean as far as North Africa. Here, in today's Tunisia, we find part of the reason for Jezebel's bad image. On these altars, Jezebel's people sacrificed their own children. Is the tale of Abraham and Isaac a general warning to the Israelites? Abraham bound Isaac to sacrifice him to God, but God said no. A cautionary tale? Don't act like the Phoenicians. Don't sacrifice your children. The Phoenicians didn't just influence the Israelites with violence. There was also sex.
So this is it. These are cultic objects, and this one dates from the time of Jezebel.
Right.
Right? And it's ivory, complete with pubic hairs, and a necklace. So
And otherwise completely naked.
naked. So we've got here something that, you know,
Reflects fertility cult.
yeah.
These idols were foreign to Israelites. The Israelites weren't supposed to worship fertility goddesses. But these are the idols that the Queen of Israel, Jezebel, would have worshipped.
So Jezebel was into that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And Ahab married her, and he didn't mind.
Obviously not. You find these things, very similar figurines in Israel and in Judah. So apparently the prophets may not have been very happy about it, but these types of cults were going on all the time, and they were heavily Phoenician influenced.
And you assume that they thought that having these things at home, maybe under your bed or over your bed, would help with fertility.
Probably. Or improve your sex life, who knows?
Phoenicians influenced the Israelites. King Ahab's marriage to Jezebel personified this. As Queen of Israel, Jezebel was a unique threat. Most threats came from outside. They were military, Egyptians attacking with chariots. But Phoenicians threatened from inside, intermarriage, a blending of faiths. The prophets didn't like this. What could they do? Jezebel held the power.
How does temple prostitution work? Well, first of all, you may have gotten the idea that it was only for women. That is wrong. Both men and women worked as temple prostitutes. And so you go to the temple and you have sex with the prostitute of choice. And then, I don't know if you paid more for the good-looking ones. I have no idea how that worked. But bottom line is that you paid the temple priest, and that money went to support your patron deity. So for your money, you got to sleep with the goddess of sex, and you get a little gonorrhea to take home with you. Now, take a look at this list, and I want to ask you the question, look it over, and if you know anything about history, ask yourself the question, how many of these goddesses demanded temple prostitution? Give you a minute to think about that. Well, if you're astute, you might recognize that they are all the same deity. It's the same God. They're all Ashtoreth, every one of them. It's just in different regions, they gave her a different name, but the worship of her is the same. As I mentioned, Baal, Ashtoreth, and Anath became the most successful pagan gods in history. It's just like every country that heard about them, they brought it back to their own country, changed the name a little bit, but the worship of that god was pretty much the same as took place in Mesopotamia. So worship of the goddess of sex through temple prostitution became very popular with men of that day. Herodotus lived between 490 and 425 BC, and he wrote that the ugliest custom in Babylon was the widespread practice of prostitution in the temple of Ishtar. Ishtar is their word for Astarte or Ashtoreth. And he says this, he says, once in their lifetimes, all women in the country were required to sit in the temple and expose themselves to a stranger. That's a euphemism for you-know-what. In return for money. And so the Babylonians, they were so into this temple prostitution thing that they said, you know what? We don't want to sleep with temple prostitutes because everybody's getting VD. That's the problem when you have a professional prostitute, is they're all full of diseases. And so you want to get syphilis, gonorrhea, and chlamydia. I mean, that's where you go. And so they found a way around that. So you could get a fresh woman. So basically, all the women were required once in their life to visit the temple and be prostitutes for a day. And I'm sure that cut down on the incidence of venereal disease for the men, but not necessarily for the women. Now, you'd think from reading that, because he describes it as a disgusting practice, that Herodotus is very much anti-Babylon. And he's thinking, oh my gosh, these poor women and mothers and daughters being forced into one day of prostitution. How horrible for them. But he goes on and says, rich and haughty women arrived in covered chariots to serve as prostitutes for Aphrodite. Here, I'm like, now this kind of caught me off guard because I thought he was sympathetic. But he's like, oh yeah, those rich women would come in covered chariots. For some reason, they didn't want people to see their faces when they showed up to be prostitute for a day. Well, why wouldn't they want people to know that, hey, it's my turn, I'm going to be prostitute for a day. If anybody wants to show up, here I am, I'm available on this day, line up with your money. You know, why wouldn't they want people to see them? You think it's like, why would he call them haughty? Because they don't want people to see that they're going to be prostitute for the day. You know, it's like, oh, you know, like prostitution's too good for us because we're rich. I don't know, kind of lost a little respect for Herodotus there. It gives you an idea as to what the attitudes were towards women under this particular religious regime, of which Jezebel is a priestess. So for those who want to say, oh, those horrible Israelites, because they were so backwards and so conservative and anti-woman, and Jezebel was a heroine. She was just a heroine, a champion of women's rights. This is the religion that she was championing, and it just doesn't sound like women have a whole lot of rights when you have temple prostitution happening on this level. Again, they're trying to make her out to be some sort of hero, and she's idealistic and a lover of the people and a champion of women's rights. They're trying to make her sound like she's a good person because the Bible presents her as a bad person, so therefore she must be a good person. All right, one of the things that characterizes what we consider good people is a trait called being conscientious. How do you treat other people? Do you restrict your behavior because you don't want to hurt other people's feelings unnecessarily, or do you hurt people for your own gain without considering their fate? All right, this is an episode from Kings, and it gives you a window into Jezebel's heart with regard to this particular trait of being conscientious. Now, it's in Arabic, okay? I wish I could find one in an English-speaking version, but there just aren't that many movies about Jezebel that follow the biblical script very well. So this one does. It's pretty close to what the Bible actually says. And it talks about how Ahab, I mentioned this earlier, about how Ahab had a next-door neighbor named Naboth. And he wanted to buy Naboth's field so that he could have vineyards and vegetables in addition to the fields that he already had. And Naboth refused to sell because his father had given him that field. It was his inheritance, and he felt that it was dishonorable to God to sell it for money. And so Ahab became so depressed that he stopped eating. He literally fell into clinical depression because he wasn't allowed to buy the field next door. And Jezebel was like, I'll fix that for you. And watch what she does.
ما بك تنظر مهتما إلى هذا البستان؟
أريد أن أضمه إلى حدائقنا، لكن الناموس يرفض بيعه لي بحجة أنه ميراث من آبائه.
لعله طامع بالربح. أعطيه ما يريد.
لا، ويعتبر المسألة دينية، ويعتبر بيع ميراث آبائه استخفافا بالرب.
ماذا تقول؟ نموت يعبد الرب؟ لا عليك يا عزيزي، أنا أدبر لك الأمر. اذهب كل واشرب وليرتاح قلبك. أنا أعطيك كرم النابوت.
كيف؟
لا عليك، أماني فقط بعد الوقت، فقط بعد الوقت.
ماذا تفعلين؟
ماذا أفعل؟ آخذ لك بستان العنب.
تأخذين لي بستان عنب؟ كيف؟
أدعو شيوخ المدينة إلى اجتماع.
وما الهدف من وراء هذا الاجتماع؟
ماذا تظن؟
أنتم ضد نابوت.
بالتأكيد.
ولكنه مواطن صالح.
مواطن صالح؟ ولكنه رفض بيعك البستان.
صحيح. هو رفض أن يبيع البستان.
لقد رتبت كل شيء يا عزيزي. شاهد زور ضد نابوت، وحكم من قبل أصدقائنا شيوخ المدينة لرجمه.
حلو. تخطيط جيد، أليس كذلك؟
ألم تسمع ما قاله شاهدان؟
سمعت، ولكن حي هو الرب، أنا لم أجدف أبدا.
شاهدان، اثنان.
أنا بريء، أنا لم أجدف.
لا، بل جدفت على الله وعلى الملك. أنت بحسب الشريعة مذنب.
أنا بريء، إنهما لا يقولان الحق.
أنت تستحق الموت رجما لتجديفك على الله وعلى الملك.
لا، بريء.
اخاف خسر.
هل ستصعد إلى بيت البعل غدا للعبادة؟
هل هناك فتيات جديدات؟
بإمكاني جذب بعض بنات الفلاحين لخدمة المعبد.
قد أصعد.
تسرني رغباتك. ماذا؟ لدي خبر صار. لقد مات النابوت.
ماذا؟
هدية لك.
كان عنيدا، لم يصغ لي.
كنت أعلم أنك ستصر.
فلتبقى هنا.
بالطبع. تعالي. هيا، خذها.
أتركك لفترة من الزمن.
ولماذا يا سيدي؟
صارت إلي كلمة الرب مجددا بخصوص أخاب.
وماذا فعل هذه المرة؟
قتل رجلا بريئا واستولى على بستانه، وقد أمرني الرب أن أقول له: قتلت ووريت أيضا، وأمرني كذلك أن أقول له: في المكان الذي لحست الكلاب فيه دم نابوت تلحس الكلاب دمك أنت أيضا.
وهل ستكون آمنا؟
من يتكلم كنبي عليه أيضا أن يستعد ليموت كنبي. أنا في يد الرب.
سابقى هنا، وليكن الرب معك.
ومعك أيضا يا ولدي. إلى اللقاء إن شاء الرب.
إن شاء الرب.
كان عليه أن يفكر بعائلته قبل أن يرفض بيع بستانه.
يا أخاب الملك، ماذا فعل؟ أين النابوت؟ أليس هذا بستانه؟
لقد وجدتني يا عدوي.
نعم، قد وجدتك، لأنك قمت بعمل الشر في عين الرب.
نابوت.
يقول الرب: أجلب عليك شرا وأبيد نسلك، والكلاب تأكل إيزابيل بإسرائيل.
كيف تخاطب الملك هكذا؟ لو سمعت زوجتي كلامك كما سمعوا هذان الشهيدان لقطعت أوصالك تقطيعا.
قد عبدت أصنام الأموريين الذين طردهم الرب من أرض بني يعقوب. لقد أصبحت وضيعا قدرا ضريحا يسكنه الموت.
لقد أخطأت وصلت شرا. لا إله إلا الله.
هيا اضرب عن وجهي.
So you get an idea. She wasn't a very conscientious woman. She allowed this man to be brutally murdered so her husband could get that field for free that he wanted. So now you kind of understand why God wasn't too happy with Jezebel. Finally he had enough, and the prophet Elijah came to him and let him know, because of these behaviors, and specifically because you killed this innocent man, you're going to die. Okay, your blood will be spilled at the same place that you spilled the blood of Naboth. In addition, your wife is going to meet a very bad fate, and in the end, the dogs are going to eat her up, and all that's going to be left of her is dog poop in the field. That was the prophecy, and that's what happened to her. God was not happy with Jezebel, and the other thing is, he completely destroyed, he killed all of her kids. All of her kids ended up dying violently, so that there were no more people from the family of Ahab and Jezebel to be king or to exist. So she was erased. Her family line was erased from history. She upset God that much. Her and Ahab made God mad enough to finally act. I mean, they got away with it for years, but when he came down on them, he came down on them hard. Now, in 2 Kings chapter 9, we have a statement that kind of validates that, you know, part of the practice of her Baalian religion involved witchcraft. It involved occult practice. And it comes in this statement in verse 22. What happened was Ahab was killed in battle, all right? And exactly, he died in the place where he had Naboth stoned to death, so the prophecy came true. So for several years after his death, his son Joram was the new king of Israel. But the real person in charge was Joram's mother, Jezebel. So for a couple of years, Jezebel was the ruling queen over Israel, and Joram was the puppet leader. And then Elijah talked to one of the military generals and promised him, hey, you kill off this evil royal family, and I will anoint you king. And so that's what ultimately happened. Now we have a confrontation between Jehu, who was that general, and Joram. And so King Joram demanded, do you come in peace, Jehu? Because he kind of felt, I guess, something's up, what's going on here. And Jehu replied, how can peace exist as long as the fornications of your mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many? And so then he proceeded to execute King Joram. And then he went all the way to the palace. She was in the southern palace, and he told, you know, she knew she was going to die. Apparently she was aware that the death sentence was coming for her, and so instead of running away, she went to the mirror and put on her makeup, got it all just right, and then stood in the window looking out at the people with all her makeup on. You know, like, see me, I'm so pretty, maybe you won't want to kill me. I don't know. And so Jehu came to the palace and yelled up, if anybody's on the Lord's side, throw that woman down. And so there were a bunch of people in the palace who were more than happy to oblige, so they grabbed her and threw her out of the window. And when she plopped down on the ground, Joram ran over her with his chariot. And then the dogs came in and ate what was left of her. So in the end, there were a pair of hands and a skull, and everything else was gone. And so just as was prophesied, she ended up turning into dog doo-doo all over the field, just as God said she would. So what we've learned from this story is, what was so bad about Jezebel? She was not, as the History Channel implies, a champion of women's rights. She was not just a powerful woman, and because she was a powerful woman, Israel hated her and God didn't want. No, it had nothing to do with her being powerful. She was morally corrupt. She was a powerful, influential woman who was morally corrupt, and she represented a really corrupt religion that God despised. Okay? She used her intellect and her craftiness in a way to turn people away from God and to create incredible injustice. She killed every prophet of God that she could find. All right, she got the people of Israel to visit. She introduced temple prostitution to Israel and had a lot of people going to those temples and engaging in those acts that God considered abominations. There was child sacrifice that she introduced to Israel, okay? So these are behaviors that God detested. She had at least one completely innocent man killed by getting people to lie and to carry out an unjust sentence just because her husband wanted a field, okay? These are the character traits of Jezebel that got her on God's bad side. And God demonstrated his displeasure with her by killing her violently and publicly. So, a reference, when God calls somebody Jezebel, now you know just how deeply offensive that name is. All right, so now let's go back to Revelation chapter 2 and put this all together.
Nevertheless, I have a few things against you, because you allow that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit sexual immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. And I gave her time to repent of her sexual immorality, and she did not repent.
Now, when it said that woman Jezebel, the two oldest manuscripts don't say that woman. It says thy wife Jezebel. So according to most biblical scholars, we're talking about the wife of the pastor, or some women who have there may be more than one, who are so close to the church. They're like it's like the intimacy between a husband and wife. So they are an integral part of the church at Thyatira, or it's literally the wife of the pastor. Or you're talking about the wife who is a false prophetess, or a bunch of women who are false prophets.
Indeed, I will cast her into a sickbed, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation, unless they repent of their deeds. I will kill her children with death, and all the churches shall know that I am he who searches the minds and hearts, and I will give to each one of you according to your works.
Okay. And in verse 23 it says, I will kill her children with death, and all the churches shall know that I am he who searches the minds and hearts, and I will give to each one of you according to your works. Now when I first read that, I'm thinking, what? I will kill her children with death. What kind of threat is that? I'm going to kill you with death. I mean, my first thought was, that is the stupidest sentence I've ever seen in the whole Bible. I didn't know the Bible was capable of making statements that dumb. I will kill you with death? What? Turns out that is an idiom. We have many idioms in the English language. She thinks she's so bad. All right, that is an idiom, and what it doesn't mean she thinks she's immoral. It means she thinks she's tough. Okay, that's an idiom. So if you take it literally, it makes no sense. You kind of have to be there and a part of the culture to understand it. When somebody threatens you and says, I'm going to kill you with death, that's a Hebrew idiom. And it means that I'm not just going to kill you. I'm not just going to end your life. You're going to die publicly, painfully, gruesomely. Okay, that's what it means. So that is a terrible thing to say to somebody. I am going to kill you with death means that you are not going to die pleasantly. You're not going to die of old age, and it won't be fast. It's going to be slow, painful, public, and gruesome. So if God tells you, I am going to kill you with death, you should be very, very afraid. What we have here is God saying, not just this woman who has led these people in the church astray. It's too late for her. He gave her a chance, and she didn't take it, and now he's done. So she is going to get punished. But what he's saying now is that her children, the followers that she has garnered, the people in this church that have actually followed her and are behaving, they're doing the sexual immorality stuff, and they're eating meat sacrificed to idols, not worrying about who it hurts, okay? Those guys are going to die bad. They're going to die gruesomely and quickly. So that's a bad thing. He's saying, look, if you don't repent, I'm going to kill you with death. So this is a warning to her followers. This is your last chance. I'm coming after you. And if you want to know what I mean by that, if you want to know what do I mean by I'm going to kill you with death, please refer to Jezebel number 1. Look at what I did to her. Now you've got an idea as to what I have in mind. So that's it for the bad part of Thyatira.
Now to you I say, and to the rest in Thyatira, as many as do not have this doctrine, who have not known the depths of Satan, as they say, I will put on you no other burden, but hold fast what you have till I come. And he who overcomes and keeps my works until the end, to him I will give power over the nations. He shall rule them with a rod of iron. They shall be dashed to pieces like the potter's vessels, as I also have received from my Father, and I will give him the morning star. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
Now this is an encouragement and a commendation to the rest of the people. As we saw earlier, the rest of the people in this church were doing a great job. They were growing. He mentioned already that what they're doing now, what their performance now is better than what it was when they first started. So overall, they're doing a great job. And if they continue doing such a great job, they have an awesome future. They will be completely identified with Christ. He talks about ruling with a rod of iron and so forth. What that means is that, according to the commentaries that I've gone through, it's kind of an indication that in the world to come, there won't be, like right now, we have good side and bad side. We have people that are pro-God and people that are anti-God. In the world that's coming, the anti-God people are going to be absent. And so there will be, I mean, as far as who's in charge, there will only be one in charge, and that's Christ. And we will be identified with him, a part of him. And so the kingdom that's coming is all good. It's all, I mean, we pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, that's what's going to happen. We are going to have a world where God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven, okay? And that's kind of a reference to that. Now, the one thing that's not entirely clear is where he says, and I will give him the morning star. And I'm not going to pretend that I know exactly what he means by that. I've seen many people theorize as to what that means. And I'm going to say right now that we don't know for sure. Now, the most well-formulated idea is this, okay? The morning star, everyone kind of agrees, is Venus. That is a word for Venus in multiple languages, and it's pretty common, okay? Venus is visible in the sky only sometimes, okay? Especially, though, if you see Venus and it's shining brightly, it's called the morning star, and it's a sign that the sun is about to come up, okay? Now, why is Venus so bright in the night sky? Well, Venus, as a planet, is about the same size as Earth. It's much closer to the sun than any other planet except Mercury, okay? It's like very close. It's the second planet to the sun. And so being so close to the sun, when you see it in the night sky, it reflects the sunlight brighter than any other object. And so when you look up in the sky right before the sun rises, you see this brilliant, brilliant star. It's not a star, it's the planet Venus. It's called the morning star. Why? Because it heralds the coming of morning, the coming of the sun, the big sun, okay? So he kind of says, I'm going to give you the morning star. Now, what does that mean? The morning star is a very beautiful thing because in a black sky of faint stars, you see this really, really bright one. So it's like an ornament. It's a beautiful ornament that stands out. It's like a diamond on a black velvet canvas. And so the brilliance of the diamond stands out in stark contrast. And he's saying, that's the beauty that you're going to have. You will stand out in stark contrast to the darkness in the universe. You will shine. You will reflect my light and be something of that kind of beauty. Okay? So that's what you are going to have, that kind of beauty. You are going to be something that reflects me forever. And you are, and I am in God, and God is the Sun, S-O-N, S-U-N, however you want to look at it. And we shine because we reflect his beauty and glory and splendor. And so that's maybe what he is referencing here. Okay, I don't know for sure, but that is, of all the commentaries that I looked at, that's the one that stood out the most, where I'm going, you know what? That sounds like that might be right. All right, so we're done with that. I hope I don't have any more chapters that are that long, okay? Because this was long. It took a long time to prepare for this, but it was very interesting, I have to say. I learned more about Jezebel than I ever knew in putting this together, and hopefully, you've got whether you've read through the whole Old Testament or not, you now have a pretty good understanding of what it means when God calls somebody Jezebel. It is not a compliment, and unlike what you learn on the History Channel and on what other secular programs where they try to make out Jezebel to be some kind of female hero, she was not a female hero, okay? She was not, okay? Just know. So now you know the full story, all right? Thanks for watching. See you next time.